Inspector Vikram Rao held the torn notebook page carefully. The handwriting was unmistakably Arov's, confirmed by school records. The words were simple, yet they sent a chill down his spine. "If I stay quiet, he says everything will be okay." Rao read it again and again. Two things about this note were absolutely terrifying. First, Arav trusted this hymn. He believed him completely. Second, Arav had somehow learned that silence equaled safety. Children don't come up with that idea on their own. Someone has to teach it to them. Returning to the Meta house, the atmosphere felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt occupied, as if an unseen presence had settled back into its old corners. Ro watched each family member with a new, sharper focus. Rohan, the older brother, just stared blankly at the walls. Neha, the mother, barely spoke a word. Dorishanta, the grandmother, clutched her prayer beads, her chanting a constant, nervous hum in the background. And then there was Kunal, the ever-present, ever-helpful relative. Always helping. Always there. Ro decided to try a small, unusual test. Standing in the middle of the living room, he announced loudly, "We might need to start digging inside the house." The reactions were immediate and telling. Neha gasped, audibly. Rohan looked utterly shocked. Dodi Shanta's chanting turned into a panicked prayer. But Kunal only asked one question, his voice steady. "How deep?" Ro didn't answer. He just watched him, filing the strange response away. Meanwhile, a forensic officer found something odd. On the inside of a bathroom cabinet door, there was a faint blue chalk mark, the kind of chalk kids use at school. But why here? Hidden inside a cabinet, at a height a small child could easily reach. It was a clue that didn't fit. A tiny detail screaming for attention. Ro began to meticulously reconstruct Arav's daily routine. School, homework, dinner, a bit of cartoons before bed. It was all predictable, all normal, except for one detail that stood out. Every single evening, between 6:30 and 6:45, Arav would spend time with Kunal. Story time, Kunal had called it when first questioned. Ro went back to Neha. What kind of stories did they share? Neha hesitated, her eyes shifting away. "Quiet ones," she finally whispered. When Ro pressed her further, Neha's explanation was even more unsettling. Kunal used to tell Arav stories where the hero survives by staying silent. That one sentence hung in the heavy air of the house. Sorby best. What was this little boy being taught to survive? The knocking sound Ro had heard in the walls the previous night still bothered him. He called in a structural engineer to inspect the house. The verdict was quick and chilling. There's a narrow maintenance cavity here, running between the inner walls and the main staircase. It was never meant for people, but a child could fit. A small child could definitely fit inside. The police didn't wait. They began to carefully open up the wall. Inside, there was dust, cobwebs, and scratch marks. But these weren't frantic, panicked scratches. They were neat, careful, and then they found it. A small piece of fabric, the sleeve of a school uniform. Arov's school uniform. He had been inside the house the entire time. Alive. At least, for a while. The absence of struggle was the most disturbing part. There were no desperate claw marks, no signs of a fight. It was as if the child had been given specific instructions on how to move, how to position himself, how to stay completely and utterly quiet. Ro finally confronted Kunal with the question no one else had thought to ask. "Why didn't you mention the cavity behind the wall?" Kunal looked genuinely surprised, as if the thought had never crossed his mind. "I didn't think it mattered." Aside simply. Ro nodded slowly and wrote something down in his notebook. That night, Dodi Shanta asked to speak with the inspector privately. Her voice shook as she recounted small, previously insignificant moments. There were times, she said, when Arav would be talking and laughing. But he'd suddenly go silent the moment Kunal entered the room. Why? Ro asked gently. The old woman swallowed hard. Kunal told him. He told him that quiet children live longer. Suddenly, it all clicked into place for Ro. This wasn't a crime of passion or violence. This was conditioning, a slow, methodical process of teaching a child that silence equals safety. Teaching him to hide. Teaching him to obey without question. The timeline showed Arav had been alive for at least 90 minutes after he was reported missing. During that critical window, Kunal had moved freely about the house while everyone else was distracted and panicked. The security's CCTV had even frozen for a few milliseconds. That now seemed far too precise to be a coincidence. It was easy to see why no one suspected him. Kunal displayed no anger, no aggression. He had no criminal record. He was the definition of patient. Observers like him don't rush. They plan. They wait. In their final interview, Rose sat across from Kunal. He didn't make any accusations. He just asked a simple question. Did Arav trust you? Kunal smiled. A soft, unnerving smile. Of course he did. And did you ever tell him to hide? Kunal paused, his calm demeanor never wavering. Then, he replied, I told him stories. The full, horrifying truth began to spill out, slowly. Kunal had been studying child psychology online, not in any formal way, just quietly, obsessively. He had developed a deeply disturbed belief that children are safest when they disappear. Disappear from the noise, from attention, from the world itself. Arav was never meant to die. In Kunal's twisted mind, he was meant to stay hidden forever. So what went wrong? Arav, being a trusting child, followed Kunal's instructions perfectly. He stayed silent. He stayed still. But Kunal had miscalculated one fatal detail. The maintenance cavity had almost no ventilation. Silence protected Arav from being found, until it was the silence itself that took him. The most terrifying part. When Arav stopped responding from inside the wall, Kunal didn't panic. He hushed, because in his mind, the silence was still working. It was the ultimate form of safety. Kunal was arrested without any resistance. As the officers led him away from the house, he sighed calmly, his voice devoid of any emotion. I never hurt him. Ro looked straight at him and replied quietly, You taught him not to ask for help. Kunal said nothing more. Weeks later, the wall was sealed, and the Meta house stood empty, a monument to a silent tragedy. Inspector Ro visited one last time before the case was officially closed. He walked through the silent rooms, the quiet, almost deafening. In Arav's bedroom, he found something everyone had missed, written faintly on the wall, in the same blue chalk from the bathroom cabinet, were a few words. I was quiet. Why didn't it work? Ro stood there in the dim light for a long, long time. Then, he reached out, turned off the light, and closed the door. Some killers don't use knives. They don't use poison. They use ideas. And when those ideas enter a child's mind, the damage is silent, and it is permanent. Thanks for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into the shadows of the human mind.